Next time on Painting and Travel, Sarah joins a naturalist in St. Augustine, Florida, to learn about shifting sands, vegetation, and creatures that thrive in this coastal area. Roger uses acrylics to paint a seascape featuring sea oats and sand dunes.
Beachscapes and dunes are a popular subject and probably one of the easier subjects to paint. And today I'm using an 11 by 20 inch masonite board. I'd often use a standard size board, which is easier to frame, but I do like a panoramic view sometimes, and I think this will fit the subject well. On my palette I have titanium white, alizarin crimson, cadmium red light, looks a little thin there, Indian yellow, cadmium yellow light, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and then I have 3 earth colors, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and burnt umber. And I have my atomizer here. It keeps my paints wet, but it's especially helpful in moving the paint around on the board. Helps the paint slide around. Now I usually start with my dark colors first, but today I'm going to do something different. I'm going to paint the sky. And since these are acrylics, they will dry very fast, and then I can continue on down with the sea oats. Now as you can see, my reference photo here, actually my reference painting, this is a painting I did in the past, it's a very blue sky. But today I'm going to change the mood, and I'm going to try and give this a different look, sort of an afternoon or a morning glow. I like to use these warm colors in paintings often. They just feel good to have a nice warm sky. I have a number of reference photos that I'm using, but I've done so many of these that I really don't have to use my reference photos very much. So here we have the sky, and when I lay this sky in with I'm going to use some cerulean blue and white here to begin with, and some burnt sienna to gray that. I'm putting this in rather thick. Now my horizon line is going to be up here. One thing I do not want to do is put the horizon line right in the center. So this painting is really about the dunes and not the sky. So the horizon line will be up in this area, and that will divide the painting into thirds. That doesn't always need to be done, but if a painting is divided into thirds, it's really sort of a fail-safe method. It's a good start to a painting, always, to consider that compositional element to divide the painting that way. Now I have put a tone on this board of basically burnt sienna and yellow ochre to give it some warmth underneath, and I can build on that. Now even at this point, some of this yellow ochre color is showing through to give a nice little glow. Now I'll wash this brush and start with some warmer cloud colors. I'll take my alizarin crimson, some yellow ochre. I'll put this right over the wet areas of the blue sky back here, bluish gray sky. Maybe dip into my cadmium yellow light as well. Clouds always seem like they would be easy to accomplish, but I have never found clouds to be simple to paint. I've always struggled with clouds. It's important to work quickly with these acrylics because they will set up and dry so very fast, but that's one of the good advantages to the acrylics always, that they do dry so fast. It does take a while to get used to them. Here right at the top, this seems too dark for me, so I'll add some titanium white to this. Just looking to get a nice mood in here on this sky to start with. And that will set the tone for the rest of the painting. Some Indian yellow and titanium white and some cadmium yellow. Maybe lighten up this side of these clouds. It's important for me to use as large a brush as possible. I mean, I'm not using a big house painting brush here. I don't think that's very wise, but I'm using a large enough brush where I can apply this paint quickly and easily. And one thing I don't want to do is just with a very small brush spend lots and lots of time dabbing on these clouds. Here I can push this paint around with a larger brush and get the effect I need. With too large a brush, I think I'll lose my identity with my paint strokes, and with too small a brush, I would also lose my ability to express myself with a small brush, because these brush strokes are really what make the painting a painting. Well, here's the painting that I'm using as reference, a painting from the past, and that's basically going to be my composition. So now I think I'll take my razor blade, get rid of some of these light colors on my palette, so I can start fresh there. And now I'm going to start with my dark colors, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. It's going to make a nice dark color. Now if I want this color to be cooler, I'll just add more blue. If I want it warmer, I'll add more of the burnt sienna. Kind of using the edge of my brush here, just scumbling this on. Now I want this dune to pop up more into the sky area. It still is wet. So I'm going to wait on that. When it dries here shortly, I'll drag these colors up into there. Now see, if I put these on right now, see what happens? This just sort of gets to be a muddy looking brownish gray, and that's what I want to stay away from. But when that's drying, we can move on to another area. I want to get this darker because I want to put my light colors over my dark colors, and that will happen later on. But I build this painting up in layers, and I'll start with the darks down here. Some more cerulean blue to vary things here. I'm very interested in getting some large shapes established in the painting. And I'm using rough brushwork down here, just with the side of my brush. This will give me an effect that looks somewhat like the beach and sand. I don't want to smooth this all out like this. I don't want to go back and forth. I don't want that too smooth. I want to just keep this, I want to rough this up just to give me a base coat of nice texture down there. I'm going to add some white in here because as this goes back, this is going to get somewhat lighter. And as it goes back, I will eliminate some of that texture. Here in the foreground, I'll see more texture than in the background, simply because it's further away. Now I want that horizon line to be up in this area. Like I said earlier, I don't want to have my horizon right in the middle of the painting. It's not always the case. Sometimes the horizon line right in the middle can work. Now I am smoothing this out, because that goes in the distance. It will give me a sense of perspective there. And then I start to bring this down and get that texture going again. Blend this smooth texture into this rougher texture. I'm not at all fussy or picky about what I'm doing now. I'm laying in these large shapes and not worrying about any detail. Well, I think this sky is dry enough to go back over it now with these dark colors. Now you can see that this has dried some. I don't get that light brown color in here. This remains very dark. Working a brush like this on the edge will tear the brush up pretty quickly, but I think that's just the price that has to be paid to paint landscapes. See, I'm just flicking that up on the edge, and it gives me some nice textured areas there that already look like grass, and I didn't have to use a small brush to make every one of those little lines that looks like weeds and grass. I'll just let the brush do the work as much as I can. And that will maintain a painterly look to the picture.
I'm so glad that you you could join us this morning on Salt Run. It's a beautiful day. This is Captain Zach McKenna, who spends most of his workday on the water, and this allows him to observe nature closely. One of his passions is to educate students of all ages about the area that we live in. Nice to see you, Zach.
You too, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love the way you've pulled us in here close to the dunes. I'm always trying to understand how the shifting dunes play a part in where we live. And I see a lot of changes over the weeks and, of course, the years.
Absolutely. These systems are very dynamic, always moving, and critical to the functioning of this ecosystem as a whole. So from the thousands of sea turtle nests that we have on our ocean-facing beaches, to the gopher tortoise that live in the dunes and are keystone species and create habitat for snakes and the Anastasia beach mouse, and we've got rabbits in the dunes as well. So the interconnectivity is the key to it all. So
yes, I know sometimes if you take a walk on the beach, you don't really think about what animals are there other than the birds, or if you have a lucky chance to see a gopher turtle maybe. But there are really quite a few creatures, including the little mouse, but I don't know what his purpose is.
Yeah, so part of the bigger picture, and one of the most endangered animals on the planet, the Anastasia beach mouse. So very little is understood about that particular species.
Oh, so he's a mystery mouse.
Mystery mouse, I love it.
I've noticed also that the dunes seem to come in different layers, and there's a scrubby area. That must be an older dune.
Yeah, so the story of Florida and these estuaries and our beaches is amazing, going back 14,000 years. So before the last ice age, Florida was 80 miles wider on both coasts.
And I've also noticed that it seems like every time we have a really bad storm, they plant more sea oats in certain areas of the dunes. Does this stabilize the dunes?
Absolutely, yeah. So the sea oat planting has worked very, very well. So it's that root structure that allows that blowing sand that you were just speaking about to collect and build. So if a dune system's wiped out by a storm, whether it's completely natural or we had a part to play in it by building things or maneuvering things, planting sea oats is a great way to get a primary or a secondary dune system to rebuild.
Walking along the beach is always delightful. You never know what you're going to find, and shells are a big part of the fun.
The shells fall apart, and sometimes they become part of a new oyster reef, and other times they break down into their elemental lime. In this sand, all sorts of decaying material. We have diatoms in the sand as well. And that's what our fiddler crabs are eating. Between every grain of sand is some piece of food for a fiddler crab.
And on the other side, we've got bigger dunes, the beach, and the ocean.
You nailed it. So now we move up into the maritime forest, and we have some oaks in the background there. We have the cedars we were talking about, the southern red cedars back there, and then we transition back into a dune system and to the Atlantic Ocean.
And this barrier, it protects us a little bit with storm surges and such, doesn't it?
Absolutely. More importantly, none of these marshes would exist without these barrier islands. So this is known as a bar-billed estuary. So none of the productivity, this is one of the most productive places on the planet, from Charleston, South Carolina down to Daytona, none of these marshes could exist if these islands didn't protect the grasses from the energy of the ocean.
Oh, I see. So the energy that you get from the ocean is very powerful.
Right.
And this whole system is kind of a buffer before it hits the city.
You got it. And more importantly, the wetlands. So this is the nursery, this is the incubator for upwards of 70% of all life on the east coast of the United States. And so all these fishes, crabs, 300 species of birds, they all make their living in these nurseries, and this is where it all begins.
Yes, I'm so glad that you like to share your information. I always learn something when I have a chance to go out with you, and it's wonderful to be here today. It's just a non-hurricane perfect day. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, Sarah.
What I've established here so far is all my large shapes and some of my values. Right now I have sort of a middle tone value in the painting, and I have a real dark. I need to put in some very lights in the painting, so I have those three ranges of light, middle tone, and dark. But I'm not going to put those lights in until a little later. I want to continue to work with these middle tones and start to bring them up gradually. Cadmium yellow light. I want to get the sand very warm looking down here. Again, I'll use this rough brush work. I'm using almost a new brush to do this, but an older brush in this case would work well, and then you wouldn't tear up a new brush quite so fast. See, now I'm starting to bring up my light values. I'm looking at the color tone of this whole painting as I go. It's a very warm painting, so the sky that I have here with these warm colors and the influence of the sky can be seen all down here with these colors, so there's a harmony. I like to use a limited palette when I do paintings, and although I do have quite a few colors out here, basically what I'm using is the three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And these are my earth tones. But these three colors here, this alizarin crimson, Indian yellow, and ultramarine blue, they're transparent colors. So those three colors will give me some rich darks, which is what this area here was made from. All that texture I put in down here is really starting to pay off, because I'm not going to have to go in there with a small brush and place all those little pieces of sand and earth that are moved around. I can just build on this texture that's already here. Often on dunes and beaches there's a vine called railroad vine. They can produce a white flower, but the ones I've seen most often have purple flowers. And if I put some of that in, it will allow me to give some what almost look like perspective lines down in here, because I can have these railroad vines lead up into this area and bring the eye up, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But before I do that, I'm going to warm this area where the sea oats are going to be. Got my darks all established. Now I'll begin to lighten this area where there's maybe some sun hitting it. Again, keeping in mind that it all has to sort of relate to the sky, because that's where all this light is coming from. So I can't have any foreign colors down here, at least not too foreign from what the sky is giving me for light. There's a lot of variation that can be done with these dunes. Here are a few other paintings that I've done in the past. And as you can see, they're all slightly similar, but different enough where they maintain some character and individuality. The time of day plays an important part in the look and mood of any painting, and there's always a fine line between technical skill and imagination. Too much technical skill with little imagination leads to an uninteresting piece, but imagination without skill, the result will be a very weak painting. It's always a balancing act. This is a 3 by 5 foot painting on canvas in which the railroad vine played an important part in the foreground. This is one of my favorites, and I think it's because of the color opposites of orange in the grasses and the blue shadows that seem to work together well. I'm going to take my spray bottle, spray this right back here by the horizon. I'm going to mix a blue color, fairly dark, and this will be the water in the distant horizon. Now, I'm not sure I should use blue here, but I think I will. I really want this to say water. What I'm going to do is take my ruler and my brush, use this flat part here as a guide, because I know this is parallel to the horizon up here. I'm going to hold my brush against my ruler, put my thumb and finger on here, and strike a line right across here. And I know it will be nice and flat and horizontal. And when I do that, I load my brush up so the paint applies itself there. There, now we've established our horizon line. I'm going to take my light colors, some yellow ochre, titanium white, and I'll put a slice of sunlight right out here on the beach. This is the center of interest here, of course, but what I want to do is bring some attention to this area. So one way to bring attention to a subject is to have more contrast in that area. So I'm going to make this very light in here next to the very dark. So that will bring a focus to this part of the painting. I'm stepping down my brush size now. I'm using a slightly smaller brush. This is where some of the sea oats and other foliage grows up between the sand. Some of the texture that I've already put on down here, that's all going to show through. I can occasionally spray my board there. That will allow this wet paint to flow over the dry paint quite easily. I'll touch in a few negative areas back here where the beach is popping through these sea oats. With some red and yellow ochre, I'll touch in a bit more color down here. Now to put in some finishing touches, I need to choose a brush. And there are several different ways I can go with this. An old beat-up brush is sometimes good for putting in some finishing touches of weeds, or a fan brush is also a good choice. I think I'll try the fan brush right now. Burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. I'm not putting any white in that because I want these to be dark. I'll spray my board. That way when I flip this fan brush up here, this paint will flow into the dry paint easily. I'm using a very light touch on this, just keeping this parallel to the painting. I can't be heavy-handed at all with this, and just putting in a few little indications of some more of these sea oats and grasses growing down here in the sand. Just flip that right up like that. So far there's been no need for a small brush to do any of this. These large brushes will do the trick. Now let's move on to the finer details, which are the sea oats growing up here. Now they often bend with the wind. Now the right brush is important on this too, but there are many ways to put small thin lines on a painting. I can still use this fan brush, and if I use it on the very edge, I can flip up these lines just with this large fan brush and still get a very fine line. Or I could go with a small brush and do the same thing. But the important thing for me is to have sort of a loose touch when I drag this up. I don't want to grip the brush too hard. I just want to let this flow up into the air there. Kind of let it find its own path. Now the sea oats themselves, when they're in bloom, are a yellow ochreish color. So I'll mix some of that color. And right on the edge of the sea oats, I just drag my brush slightly this way. These are great plants because they help to hold the soil on beaches. So they're great for keeping the erosion down. They're also protected, so they're illegal to pick. So don't pick them. Now I do want to add some greens to this. I'll take my yellow, ultramarine blue, and I'll just add a few touches of green here and there, just so this isn't quite so brown looking. A few more light blue shadows to bring some color down into the foreground. That's basically cerulean blue and white, touch of red. And with my white and yellow ochre, I think I'll flatten this area right in here. I feel like there's too much texture in the painting, so I want to eliminate some of it. So the best place to eliminate that is in the distance. And when I do a painting like this, I really never know how it's going to come out. It's planned out somewhat, but these things really take their own course. The area right here doesn't have much going on in it. We have a lot of sea oats growing up, but we can't see any of those sea oats coming down into that dark area. So I'll take a light color of the burnt sienna with some white, maybe a touch of blue, and I'll find where these sea oats are coming down, and I'll just continue that line down into the painting. So now it looks like they continue from the bottom on up. To finish this, we'll add that railroad vine. It's a dark color, and those railroad vines will just sort of creep along the sand. Here's where I can create some perspective that will lead the eye into this picture. Just have another vine come out this way, come down. Now these vines sort of go everywhere, but so they branch out with some light green. I'll lighten these with a few of the leaves. Now purple is one color that's very hard to mix using reds and blues. Store-bought purples always are more intense and more pure. So I'm going to use a purple here out of the tube. I'll take some white with this purple and put a few of those railroad vines in there. Don't want too many, just enough to give it a touch of color. With the fan brush, touch more greens here and there. And I think to finish this off, just going to put a few more highlights here in the sand. Well, for me, that's the basics of creating a beachscape painting with some sea oats. I'm always tempted to put in more details, and it's often difficult to know when to quit. But there's always a point where I know if I add more to the painting, it will suffer rather than show improvement. So I think I'm going to stop at this point and call this a finished piece.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.